European colonisation has impacted the current educational context for Indigenous people, as their side of the story is yet to be acknowledged. Brian Atwood, 2000, refers to this as the burden of the past in the present. The Australian curriculum has made it mandatory for Indigenous studies to be taught in all schools. But what to extent can it be taught? Studies have proven that 35% of teachers feel confident to teach Indigenous culture appropriate. So what does this say about the curriculum being taught within schools? Therefore, when teachers implement the study of colonisation, they can focus upon the Indigenous perspective of how Australia was established and how this date has impacted Indigenous people today. European colonisation began in 1770 with Lieutenant James Cook claiming possession of the east coast of Australia for the British Crown. With the decision to colonise Australia, Captain Arthur Phillip arrived in 1788 with the first fleet of 1,500 convicts, crew marines and civilians of Sydney Cove. A website called Australia's Together has a video displayed of what occurred in colonisation. The Europeans classified Australia as terra nullius, which is a Latin legal term from Roman time meaning a land belonging to no one, but it was actually a tribe who lived in a nomadic way. Europeans believed that the Aboriginals displayed lack of farming, lack of the use of land, which concluded that the land was empty. While the beginning of colonisation, Aboriginals and Europeans' relationship was reasonably friendly until the Aboriginal people realised that the colonists would seriously disturb their lives. This involved an epidemic disease, which Governor Phillip in 1790 reports within 14 months of the arrival of the first fleet, half of Indigenous people were killed in Sydney region from smallpox. Their land was seized from them, natural food resources and the order of nomadic life was gone. Physical and sexual abuse occurred for Indigenous women and children. Missionaries were developed to protect Indigenous people, but these developed into places which slowly stole the cultural identity away from them, as they were able to adapt to European lifestyle of how they dress, religion, language and cultural values. This practice resulted in the removal of all Indigenous and Torres Strait Islanders children to European foster families or in the institutions. As you can see, these epidemics would have an immense amount of effect on Indigenous people and will be continuing to this present day. How are Indigenous people affected? The 2001 census states that Indigenous people live in low socioeconomic environments which consist of poverty, homelessness and unemployment. Thompson 2004 explains that the causes are associated with high levels of poor nutrition, excessive alcohol consumption, smoking and lack of physical activity. Indigenous way of life was taken from them. They were forced to believe in other ways of life, something that was unnatural for themselves. The exposure to alcohol, the new foods, work and housing have created huge impacts on Indigenous people's lives, and let's not forget the important part of the sorrow, the loss and the pain these people have had to endure. Can we blame them for how they live today? No, because the impact of colonisation did this to Indigenous people. Cowlisher states that this so-called new history has created new beliefs, emotional, moral and political burdens for Aboriginals. As so-called the Aboriginal history or Aboriginal studies told from non-Indigenous people does not accurately endorse the Pacific way of Australian history. Therefore, teachers need to understand this historical event and an in-depth knowledge of how they occurred. Teachers cannot just teach what typical Aboriginal history, as Cowlisher states, they need to teach the new history, which is told by Indigenous people. Colonisation is a perfect subject for teachers to teach, as it provides students with a basis of how Indigenous people became recognised. This event can provide a deeper understanding of Indigenous cultures if students are exposed to Aboriginal history, the new history. Teachers need to mend the relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, and it is through building positive relationships with Aboriginal community. Harrison 2011 explains that there is no point in reading a dreaming story from text to students, as this will provide the wrong information about Aboriginal culture because students will believe that the story is a myth and made up. Have elders or someone from the community reenact or read their view of the story to the students. This will also be a fantastic way of incorporating Aboriginal culture into the school community continuously, instead of only discussing or celebrating this culture on certain days or weeks. For example, Nodat Week or Mabu Day. Colonisation can provide students with so much information about how the Indigenous people are affected and contribute to their country. It broadens their perspective and will encourage students to be accepting and respectful of Aboriginal people. Colonisation can contribute to a deeper understanding about teaching and learning with Indigenous cultures by allowing students to study what really occurred during this time, what happened, what Indigenous people had to endure. Exposing students to colonisation will help with mending relationships with Indigenous and non-Indigenous cultures. Brian Atwood, 2000, states that Australia has yet to even realise that it has a difficult past which it must confront. Teachers need to understand that colonisation can help confront the past, and by encouraging students to understand Australian history and accept Indigenous culture. It's about mending the relationships, accepting Indigenous culture, and not splitting the verses of events. From researching colonisation and learning what occurred, it is evident that the teaching and learning of Indigenous culture is still based upon separate versions containing non-Indigenous and Indigenous views. There is one version of how colonisation for non-Indigenous people and another for Indigenous people. Captain Cook is acknowledged as the first person to discover Australia, but really, and evidently, Aboriginal people were. They lived here first. Therefore, the study of Aboriginal culture needs to be implemented into the curriculum more than just when a day is recognised throughout the year. For example, NAIDOC Week, Australia Day, Mabu Day, but only acknowledging these significant events on certain days of the year. It is teaching students that society only needs to recognise, acknowledge and pay respect to Aboriginal culture when it is advertised. By implementing tokenistic experiences, students are not learning the importance of Aboriginal culture in their contemporary life. They are not learning adequate Aboriginal history with Indigenous views. As you can see, colonisation is a significant event which can provide students with insight into the Indigenous culture. Colonisation is exposed well in the classroom by teachers. If exposed well in the classroom by teachers, can help students learn the history of Australia from an Indigenous perspective, and can change students' perspective of trying to mend relationships with Indigenous people and respecting their culture. Implementing Indigenous studies frequently into the curriculum will adjust the impact on future generations of students, as they will learn that it is okay to use their language, learn their way, and feel comfortable within their environment. Thank you.